It had been Adrian's idea to check out this unexplored cave system, and I was deeply regretting my decision to accompany him. But I wanted one last good memory with him, and honestly, I felt guilty. We had both known that our 6-year-long relationship was nearing its expiration date, but I was the one who had instigated our breakup. And now, we were crawling on all fours through a tight tunnel. My helmet scraped loudly against the ceiling of the tunnel. It was definitely becoming narrower. Stone pressed down on me from all sides, and I couldn't seem to take deep enough breaths. An image floated through my mind. Someone squeezing a tube of toothpaste until the paste spilled out and over their hand. "Adrian," I yelled. "Can you hear me?" No response. He had been ahead of me only a minute ago. There wasn't enough space for me to turn around. If I wanted to go back, I would have to crawl backwards, without being able to see what was behind me. I paused for a moment and concentrated on taking one measured breath after another. I was not going to have a panic attack here. I reminded myself that Adrian had made it through to the other side. That meant that the tunnel would widen at some point. Probably. Maybe. A few minutes later, the tunnel spat me out into a low, wide chamber. The stone walls here also a rich brown striped with white and yellow. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and flowstones decorated the walls. I had spent a few minutes simply lying on my back, sucking in one deep breath of air after another. I would never take breathing for granted again. From what seemed like a great distance, Adrian said, "Hey, I found a shaft. It has to be at least 200 feet. I pushed myself up and blinked away the purple spots that danced across my vision. Adrian was crouched down next to a hole in the middle of the chamber. It led down to an impenetrable darkness. He had already put on his caving harness and was pulling out a climbing rope from his backpack. "Are you sure that we should keep going?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. I didn't want to set him off. The last thing I wanted was for us to start arguing again. But what if we ran out of water and became lost? We had already spent the past 2 hours exploring the cavern before finding the tunnel. And my water bottle was 3/4 empty too. He laughed. "Oh, don't be such a worrywart, Alice." I glared at him. This is why I had known our breakup was inevitable. To Adrian, I would always be the girl with generalized anxiety disorder. He viewed everything I thought and felt through the lens of my disorder, and it was a constant battle to get him to take my concerns seriously. But as we descended, wonder eclipsed my frustration and worry. We weren't even halfway down, and we had already passed several other openings, ones that probably led to other caverns or maybe even other shafts. The sheer size of this cave system was astounding. How on earth had it remained undiscovered for so long? I unlocked the descender and slid down the last few feet, landing with a grunt. The impact rattled my teeth. When I turned on my flashlight, I forgot how to breathe. We stood in a vast cavern. It was so huge that I couldn't even see the walls or ceiling, and my flashlight barely illuminated the space around us. Someone could have transported an entire bustling city down here, full of thousands of people, with plenty of room to spare. Adrian grinned at me and said, "I wish I could stay here forever." I agreed. Before I had met him, I had thought that spending your spare time squeezing through tight, damp spaces for fun was insane. Granted, I still thought that it was insane, but I understood the appeal of it now. It was intoxicating to discover the unknown, and to know that you were one of the few people who had ever ventured here. He shouldered off his backpack and pulled out a glow stick, and when he snapped it in half, it cast a ghostly yellow light. He dropped it on the floor and said, "Come on, let's keep going. I want to map out as much of it as I can." Adrian charged ahead, whereas I walked slowly behind. I didn't want to find out the hard way that the ground in front of us dropped off into a sheer cliff. I imagined falling helplessly, aware that I only had seconds to live, and unable to do anything about it. Sharp rocks piercing my skin and pinning me in place like a butterfly in an entomologist's collection. As I trudged through the darkness, I realized something odd. We hadn't seen a single creature in this cave system so far. No snakes, salamanders, not even spiders and beetles. The cavern eventually led us to 3 different tunnels, and I caught up with Adrian there. The one in the middle was small, even smaller than the tunnel that we had crawled through earlier. We wouldn't fit. The one on the right sloped uphill while the left one remained level. Other than those superficial differences, the two seemed more or less the same to my uneducated eyes. "Which way?" I asked. Before Adrian could answer, shrieks rang through the air. They came from the tunnel on the left. I took a step back involuntarily. Nothing human had ever produced shrieks like that. Goosebumps crawled down my arms, and I fought the urge to blindly run away in the opposite direction. "What the heck was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think we should leave, like right now." The shrieks repeated themselves. This time they were closer, much closer, and they were accompanied by an eerie hissing noise. I knew with awful certainty that there was something headed straight towards us. "Let's go," I shouted, yanking at Adrian's arm. Finally, he got with the program and started running. We went down the right-hand tunnel, which branched off into a dizzying array of various passageways. Panic overrode all rational thought, and I forgot to keep track of the twists and turns that we had already taken. It didn't help that we sometimes had to double back when the passage led to a dead end, or became too narrow to continue. No matter how quickly we ran, or which way we went, the thing from the tunnel continued to chase us. Its shrieks soon drowned out the sound of our ragged breathing. It was gaining on us. Worse still, I knew that I couldn't keep up this pace for much longer. A stitch burned in my side and my breath came in heaving gasps. Inspiration struck. Maybe we couldn't outrun it, but we could hide from it. I shoved at Adrian until he stopped running and gestured frantically towards a nearby fissure. I had to scramble into it with my head turned sideways to fit. Adrian threw himself into it after me, and as he did so, his headlamp fell to the floor and shattered, plunging us in darkness. Stone walls cradled my helmet between 2 freezing, unyielding hands. My cheek caught on the jagged edge of one of the rocks and tore open, soaking the collar of my jacket with blood. I barely even noticed. I kept going deeper into the fissure until I could no longer move. The shrieks had stopped at some point. Maybe the thing had already left. Fear stole the breath from my lungs. Fear that at any moment, something with sharp claws would plunge us out of our hiding spot, as easily as a crow plucking out an eyeball from someone's socket. There was a snuffling sound. The darkness was so complete that I couldn't see Adrian beside me, much less what was out there. An awful thought occurred to me. What if it could smell my blood? If that was the case, if it discovered us, we would die. We had nowhere else to hide, nowhere else to run to. I tensed and screwed my eyes shut, praying to whatever God was listening that we would survive this encounter undetected. Please, don't let it notice us. Please. Suddenly, it rushed past us. Even sandwiched inside the fissure, I felt the rush of air displaced from its passage tugging at my hair and clothes, as though a train had just pulled away from the platform. Rocks clattered to the ground. I tried very hard not to think about how large it must be. Adrian let out a shuddering sigh. Jesus Christ. I managed to raise one arm to my headlamp and turned it on. I had dropped the flashlight somewhere while we were running, though I couldn't remember where. Meager light flooded what little I could see of the cavern. Adrian's body blocked most of the opening. "Do you see anything out there?" "No, but," he said again. "Alice, I left all of our supplies out there. The first aid kit, spare flashlights, the food and candles. It's all inside my backpack and I didn't bring it with us." "Okay, that's okay. Do you remember the way back? Or should we stay put and wait for someone to find us? We can look around for any handprints and footprints that we might have left behind, and follow those to go back the way that we came." He started squirming his way back out of the fissure. I tried to follow and slid 2 inches to my left, but then I couldn't move at all. I was stuck. The fear came rushing back, and I screamed, "Adrian, help me!" I wanted out. I needed to get out. A film strip of images clicked through my mind. I imagined staying trapped down here, unable to move, until that thing came back and found me, or slowly dying of thirst, growing progressively weaker while my skin loosened, and my tongue swelled up and cracked. "Calm down, Alice." For once, I didn't mind Adrian saying that. How could I have been so stupid? I should have known better than to move into a space this narrow. His hand found mine and squeezed tightly. "Stay calm, all right? Just get me out of here. I'm going to. I'll pull you and you're going to push with your feet at the same time. Do you understand?" A wave of pathetic gratitude washed over me. I had no words to describe how glad I was that he was here with me right now. "Yes, I'm ready." I couldn't help tensing up in anticipation of the pain. I told myself that it would be over soon. The fissure would widen in a few feet. Adrian abruptly let go of me. "Give me your headlamp." "Why? What's wrong?" With his headlamp broken, my flashlight gone, and all of our other sources of light abandoned near the entrance of the cave, this headlamp was our only source of light. "Just give it to me." "No, not until you tell me what's wrong." As if in response, a familiar shriek rang through the air, its volume steadily increasing. The cave sent its echoes bouncing around us. I couldn't figure out which direction the sound was coming from. "I'm sorry, Alice, I really am." He reached out for my headlamp, undoing the straps with brutal efficiency. I tried to bat his hands away, but only my left arm could move freely. My right arm was pinned down next to me, my shoulder solidly wedged in the fissure. In a matter of seconds, Adrian had taken the headlamp and secured it over his helmet. I heard the click in his throat as he swallowed. "I'll come back for you if I can." "No, don't leave me." I reached out for him and managed to grab his wrist. He shook me off easily. "Adrian, please don't leave me here." He turned away, taking the light with him. As I listened to his footsteps fading, I realized that I was going to die down here, trapped hundreds of feet below the surface of the earth. If Adrian made it out, would he tell my parents the truth of what had happened to me? Probably not. He would make something up, something that painted him in a heroic light, and that didn't involve stealing my headlamp and abandoning me. Rage ignited and burned through my veins, chasing away the terror. I'm not going to die like this. I forced myself to relax every muscle in my body, to ignore the ever-present shrieks and the pain in my neck from holding my head sideways for so long. I recalled advice that I had once read online, from the caving subreddit. If you get stuck, exhale and then move. Go slow. I took as deep a breath as I could manage, the stone wall constricting my chest, and expelled all the air from my lungs at once, while pushing myself sideways. I slid a few inches to my left, and then my helmet scraped against both sides of these stone walls, forcing me to a stop. I listened intently, wondering if the thing in the tunnel had heard me, but these shrieks actually seemed to be diminishing, as if it was moving further away. Sweat pooled down my back and the cut on my cheek twinged with pain. I remained completely still until I could focus again. I pushed away the terror, exhaustion, and anxiety, and concentrated only on my breathing. I exhaled, moved, took a small breath and let it out, moved again. Eventually, my left hand found a protrusion in the rock, somewhere near my hip. I wrapped my fingers around it and pulled with all my strength on the next exhale. The relentless pressure dropped away, and I could breathe freely again. By the time that I had slid out of the opening of the fissure, I had lost several layers of skin. I didn't care. I collapsed, shivering uncontrollably from relief. I had no light sources, no food, and less than a quarter of water left. I also didn't have any way to stay warm because we had left our candles in plastic bags in Adrian's backpack. I looked around myself, knowing that it was impossible for my vision to adjust to the darkness when I was underground. On the other hand, my other senses seemed to have become sharper to compensate. I could hear every rustle in the darkness, every pebble knocked over, and I could feel the wind against my... Wait. Wind. I turned slowly in place, trying to pinpoint where the air current was coming from. If I followed it, I might be able to find the exit, and it might also lead me deeper into the cave, resulting in my certain death. But I would die if I stayed here too. Eventually, the thing would come back, and it would probably find me sooner than any rescuers would. No one would know that we were missing until tomorrow night. I picked the direction that seemed most likely, and I crawled blindly forward. I didn't trust myself to walk. It would be too easy to misjudge a step and fall to my death. Every single molecule of my being focused on following the air current. It was a hellish game of Marco Polo. Whenever the breeze faded away or I lost track of it, I had to stop and back up until I could feel it again. Additionally, my progress was slow and tedious because I had to keep piling up stacks of rocks to mark my way so that I wouldn't be going in circles. I also had to crawl with one arm extended to feel for any obstacles. More than once, my hand encountered a stone wall that I would have otherwise crawled straight into. After an interminable length of time, I became aware that not only was the breeze becoming stronger, but that there was some kind of light ahead of me. I squinted at it, momentarily hopeful that I had miraculously found daylight. But no, it was a beam of electric light. It stayed fixed and unmoving, focused on a distant point. I badly wanted to run to it, but I forced myself to keep moving at a snail's pace. Even though that I couldn't see the source of the light and it was still too dark to make out my surroundings clearly, I strongly suspected that I was moving through another vast cavern. God, if I ever made it out of here, I never wanted to see a cave again. Heck, I would sell off my caving gear or just burn it. The ground was strangely uneven. I kept having to clamber over huge smooth rocks that had small holes inside of them. Air rushed into them, and they seemed to move under my hands and feet. When the ground finally leveled out, I scrambled up and walked over something that squelched and crunched under my feet. The light revealed someone who was sitting against the wall of the cavern, unnaturally still. His face was pale and beaded with sweat, and it remained fixed towards whatever his headlamp was illuminating. He was alive. I could see the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. Anger and spite quickly overrode my sympathy. As far as I was concerned, Adrian deserved to experience the same fate as me. I strode forward and yanked the headlamp off his helmet, absent-mindedly wiping my hands off. It was weirdly sticky. After securing the headlamp, I tilted my head down to illuminate Adrian more clearly, and screamed. A cluster of cream-colored sacks covered most of his body, each one roughly the size of my hand and shiny as well as semi-transparent. As I watched the sack bulging over his stomach shivered slightly. There was a dark worm-like shape writhing around inside of it, trying to get out. I knelt down beside him, my hands hovering uselessly over his face. Blood had dripped down every exposed inch of his skin. He had to be dead. No one could lose that much blood and still be alive. But right as I came to that conclusion, his lips trembled and shaped my name. Alice. His hand twitched and reached for me. Khan. He wheezed something inaudible. I got up so quickly that I nearly overbalanced. Adrian couldn't seem to move. His hand remained on the ground, palm up, the fingers twitching helplessly like the legs of a dying spider. But his eyes were horribly aware, full of pain and terror. He understood what was happening to him. He could feel everything. I knew that I had to help him, but the thought of touching him, of pressing my skin against those things, filled me with revulsion. I continued backing away, unable to stop myself. Something moved around me, something that I had assumed was simply part of the ground. It had detached itself from the darkness, uncoiling from another cluster of sacks, 10, no, 15, 20. Every single one pulsated as the things inside of them attempted to claw their way out. And next to them, surrounding them in fact, was an endless sea of bones. In some places, they stretched up to the ceiling of the cavern. Suddenly, the sacks and mounds of bones disappeared from view, and my headlamp showed me a glimpse of pale human arms and what looked like a human head and torso. But it turned a face towards me that had no eyes. A pair of mandibles protruded from where the mouth should have been, and as it rose to its full height, I saw that its torso tapered off into a flattened, many-segmented body. Each segment had a single pair of spiny legs attached, and all the legs ended in claws that clicked against the ground when it moved. It towered over me and gave an ear-piercing shriek. Sick with dread, I froze, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. It darted towards where Adrian was prone on the ground. It paused for a few seconds, swaying in place, and then slithered to a different part of the cavern. Its mouth gaped open hungrily. It knows that I'm nearby, but it can't tell exactly where. Without warning, it moved its head, viper quick, straight towards me. I forced myself to stay still even as its face came to a stop only inches before mine. My legs shook from exhaustion. Its front two limbs writhed and clutched at the empty air. I knew somehow that it had found Adrian earlier. It had paralyzed him with its bites and left him on the ground for its yet unborn children. Abruptly, it scuttled towards the entrance of the cavern, letting out another shriek before leaving. Behind me, Adrian screamed. I turned around just in time to see something erupt out of the egg of his stomach. A miniature version of the adult, roughly the length and width of my arm. It chittered loudly. It stretched its head up, seeming to bask in its freedom. And then, in the blink of an eye, it lunged towards Adrian and tore his throat open. Fresh red spurted through the air, but he had lost so much already that it died down into a trickle almost instantly. More chittering echoed around the cavern. I ran for it, following the air current that had led me here. I didn't bother trying to leap over the eggs. I ran right through them, crushing their disgusting cargo beneath my feet. I only wished that I could destroy them all. As I broke open their eggs, some of them managed to scurry away from me weakly, whimpering. The passage led upwards at an increasingly steep slope. There were bones scattered here, and they seemed larger than those that I had noticed before. Scraps of rotting flesh still clung to them. I ignored them, all as best I could, dragging myself upwards. My throat burned with thirst, and the taste of copper flooded my mouth. I wedged my fingers and toes into any cracks that I could find, and as I climbed, I stopped hearing the hungry shrieks of those things in the eggs. But I didn't stop. I kept going even as the passage narrowed and squeezed all the air from my chest. I would rather die from falling than from being eaten alive by those things. Time passed. I don't know how much of it, how long I spent climbing in the darkness, only that it felt like years. An hour, 3. I had lost all sense of time. It became measured in the aches of my muscles and the waves of thirst and hunger that shook my body. And I started to wonder if I would ever be able to leave. Maybe I would be trapped down here forever, climbing endlessly, like Sisyphus rolling his boulder up the hill for eternity. But after squirming through yet another narrow part of the passage, my foot nearly slipping on the smooth rock, I saw it. Daylight. Fresh adrenaline spurred me forward. If I had had any energy to spare, I would have cried. But all I could do at that moment was pull myself up mechanically, until I had reached the very top and there was nowhere else to go. Warm, rain-scented air greeted me, and I sprawled down on the ground, too exhausted to stay standing. I briefly saw Adrian's pale face in my mind's eye before I pushed it away. Every few seconds, I looked up to reassure myself that I was really outside. I kept thinking that the sky seemed like a flimsy mask, as if at any moment, something would rip it away to reveal a stone face underneath. The opening to the cave needs to be sealed. Better yet, we should destroy everything in it. I've been thinking about it lately. There were 18 eggs attached to Adrian or lying in the ground next to him, and roughly 20 or so guarded by that abomination. I only crushed a handful of them when I ran away. Let's say I managed to get 3 or 5. That's about 33 eggs, but I didn't even see the entire cavern. Some centipede species can lay up to 60 eggs at a time. How many years has it been laying eggs? And how many of those eggs have hatched? I don't know, but I'm sure of one thing. They've eaten almost everything down there, and it's only a matter of time before they run out of food completely. And when they do, I don't think that they're just going to quietly starve away. No, they're going to seek out more food. And there's only one direction they can go towards in order to do that. Up.